before we get to our podcast, let's get to our sponsor. And this is one you're definitely going to want to check out. It's the new X-Miami apartment community, the most fun and convenient place to live for modern Miami locals, located right across from American Airlines Arena. Rents starting in the 1200s, including a huge gym, a 2-level co-working space, an epic pool deck, and a lobby with a coffee shop and a cocktail lounge. Manage your keys, packages, and thermostat using a game-changing mobile app. You can rent an apartment furnished or unfurnished, or rent by bedroom. Learn more at xmiami.co. That's xmiami.co. Mention 5 Reasons, and you get an exclusive discount at move-in. And now, on with the show. Welcome into another episode of the 5 Reasons podcast. This is number 42. I'm Ethan Skolnick here, as always, with Chris Whittingham. We decided that we were going to do post-game pods for as long as the Heat playoffs last, and now they're over. And so this will be the last Heat playoff pod that we do for this particular season. The Heat lose in 5 games to the Philadelphia 76ers, hung in there again in the first half tonight. This time it was the third quarter, not the fourth quarter, that did them in as they lose 104.
Reverting to their third quarter ways.
Third quarter ways, a little bit of a different game in terms of pace than we've seen in recent games, but the result was the same as 3 other games in this series where really the Sixers just have too much talent for the Heat. So we're going to do a little bit of a post-mortem on this, but we're going to look ahead a little bit also because I know you don't want to be too depressed as a listener in terms of what you're going to get here. One thing to mention before we move on, be sure to follow us at 5 Reasons Sports. That's the number 5 Reasons Sports. We'll continue to bring you Heat content from us and also from our partner, Miami Heat Beat. But also we're going to be doing a lot of stuff with the NFL Draft this week, including on Thursday where the guys from 3 yards per carry will be taking over the account for the entire day to take your questions related to the draft. That's in addition to Wednesday, another segment of Ask CK with CK Parrott, Chris Kaufman on that particular account. So definitely check that out. We'll have more information for you at the back end of this pod. All right, so Chris, let's get into it here with part 1, and we're going to dissect a little bit of what happened tonight before we move on to what this means for the future. And the big difference tonight, Chris, for me was that, again, the pace in the first half I thought was much more to Miami's liking. The problem I had with Games 3 and Games 4 was that Miami was scoring easily in the first half, but simply playing too fast for what they really want to do, and eventually that was going to catch up with them. So I thought with this game tied at the half at 46, that Miami was actually in pretty good position. The Heat were not shooting very well. They got nothing out of Josh Richardson, which is something I want to talk about a little bit more here because I did not think it was a great decision for him to play, and that's not hindsight. I tweeted that before the game. The Heat have typically not had great success when guys have pushed themselves on the floor in the playoffs. I go back to a couple situations in particular, Chris, before we move on. Udonis Haslem coming back from injury in 2011 in that Boston series. It was the worst I've ever seen him play in his life, and he ended up coming back in the Chicago series and playing pretty well. But that Boston series, he wasn't ready.
Can we say that him playing in those games might have ruined the rest of his career?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And if you talk to him about it, he acknowledges it, that he should not have come back and played. Again, he gave them a huge lift against Chicago. He had these 8 maniacal minutes against the Bulls, but that Boston series, he wasn't ready. So I said that before this game, that I didn't know if it was a great idea for Josh Richardson to play. And I don't know if the injury had anything to do with this, but he picks up 3 fouls pretty quickly. Josh Richardson tonight, Chris, was a minus 17 in 7 minutes.
I couldn't believe the box score when you told me that. I thought it was a misprint.
Minus 17, team worst in 7 minutes. And I'm not going to blame Josh for trying to get out there and help his team. Obviously, he wanted to be out there, and I respect that, but probably should not have started tonight. So, I mean, that was one issue. The other issue was you knew from the start tonight that Hassan Whiteside, again, was not going to be effective. We'll touch on that more here over the course of the pod. But even with Richardson and Whiteside giving you nothing, and James Johnson not having a field goal in the first half, the Heat were tied, Chris. Like, they were in this thing. And then we saw the third quarter, and this was my big issue with Spoelstra's decisions in this series. And as you know, I tend to side with Eric most of the time, but I never liked this starting lineup. And again, and I know Caius Duncan, our partner over at Miami Heat Beat, said that actually the last 2 games, the starting lineup was their best lineup. But I just never liked the composition of that lineup. and the energy of that lineup in the second half. By the time that lineup checked out, the game was over. And so, I just, again, sort of questioned the decision to go with those 5 and not to get Wade and Winslow more minutes, not just overall, with Winslow ending up with 25. Dwyane did end up with 31. A lot of them were late. But I thought that maybe even to start one of those 2 guys in the second half would have been a better decision.
I think starting those guys from the beginning of the game would have been a better idea. And we talked about this all year long, right? Finding the right combination of 5 players that allows you to best leverage your offense and your defense. It seems like the Heat could do either one or the other. I either put together my best defensive lineup, but then we can't score, or you put together your best offensive lineup, and then the defense gets shredded. I think Wayne Ellington probably was sort of the biggest victim of that in this series, where, yeah, maybe he can provide you spacing, he made a couple of threes, but defensively just gets run around in circles and gets lost and is unplayable on that end of the floor. So I think you saw what really we talked about all year long play out in this series in multiple respects, and that being one of them. I thought, if I said to you, Ethan, who are the 2 best players in this series for Miami? They were, for me, Dwyane Wade and Justice Winslow. Goran Dragic can make an argument to be in there as well. I thought Dragic was fine, particularly in these last 4 games. I don't even know what he ended with tonight, but I know he came into tonight with 3 straight 20-plus point games. So I thought he was good. But I thought Winslow and Wade had the most impactful minutes in this series. And if it's game 5 for your life, like if you're playing the next 3 games and you have to win them for your life, what are you sticking to your convention for, to your lineups for, to your rotation for? I don't understand that. And I think you saw straight away that, okay, they didn't start with, Winslow or Wade, but then Spoelstra makes a change after 90 seconds to take out Richardson. He makes a change after 3 minutes to take out Whiteside. And so if you're ready to deviate from the plan so quickly, why not just devise a new plan? You had 2 days off to figure out what that plan was going to be, and they just didn't. And I think all series long, Eric Spoelstra struggled to find combinations. And while I'm not surprised, given sort of the Heat's mishmash of players, I do think he deserves a fair bit of criticism for not really being able to figure that out at any point in the series.
The thing that surprised me about it, if you would have told me that they started that lineup in game 1 and the lineup looked as shaky as it did, that Eric would end up staying with it for the entire series, I would have thought you were crazy. And I've said on the pod, we've been doing these pods after every game, that it typically takes Eric kind of an extra game to make that decision. And most famously, you look back at 2006. You look back at 2011. Yeah, most famously, you look back at 2011 and, J.J. Barea being inserted into the starting lineup by Rick Carlisle and Spoelstra waiting until game 6 to put in Mario Chalmers, and I think Mario had 20-plus in that game 6, and it made you think, well, why were they not doing this before? But to go the entire series and not make a change, again, during the 2012 run where Bosch got hurt, Eric kept tinkering. He went with Dexter Pittman, for God's sake, during one game for about 3 minutes, right? And then made another decision.
I think he picked up 14 fouls in those 3 minutes.
He did. And then that was the last we ever saw of Dexter Pittman, who, by the way, my favorite Dexter Pittman memories were always talking to him about Adele in the locker room.
Really?
Dexter Pittman had a screensaver of Adele. Yes, he was a big fan.
I will admit that I'm a big fan of Adele. I think she's fantastic.
Yes, I think she is too. But it was an unusual conversation to have
to have with an NBA player
in an NBA locker room. But getting back to the Heat here a little bit, yeah, Spoelstra's decision to stay with that group of 5, which again at the beginning of the series I thought had more to do with just not losing Whiteside completely from a mental perspective, and so continuing to run him out there in the starting lineup, and so especially when Embiid came back. And then, Tyler, look, I know Tyler had, 16 tonight, but Tyler was not healthy. And even if Tyler was healthy, he was not an ideal fit for this series. He's just not big enough to play against these guys for any significant length of time. And, Spoelstra went to Magruder by necessity today. I thought Magruder, who didn't play especially well, but I would have probably started him over Tyler anyway, or started him over Josh Richardson, who wasn't sort of ready to play today. So I just thought from a lineup perspective, Eric had options. I mean, whether it was, again, Winslow or Wade or Magruder or going bigger with Olynyk. I mean, there were a lot of different ways he could have gone. He chose none of them. and to stay with that particular lineup. And it does speak a little bit, Chris, to what you're talking about, that there was no lineup for this team that was going to be perfect, right? I mean, it's just the way that they're built, and that's not Spoelstra's fault. I mean, that's a roster construction problem, and that's something Riley needs to address. But I did think that Eric was a little, I don't know if stubborn's the word, but clearly he didn't think he had a better option than that starting lineup. But I just never thought that lineup was going to work, and that third quarter was just disastrous, and I think you saw that coming.
Yeah, and I do want to point out, though, you mentioned the pace being slower in the first half. If you actually look at the NBA.com/stats number, it was actually lightning quick. It was 104, which is a really high pace number. It really just seems, though, like the Heat play better in games that are low scoring. So to me, and I tweeted this, and so it's not like me looking at the numbers and I saw that. No, both teams played poorly in that first half. I thought Philadelphia had any number of chances to go out in front of this series, and I think in general in this series they actually left a lot of chances out there. I think they left big victories out on the floor because they, particularly in 3 of the 5 games, did not shoot well from 3. Tonight it was 7 of 28 from 3. And credit to the Heat, they adjusted a bit after Philadelphia's 2 incredible 3-point performances. But I just think the Heat function better when offense is in the mud, when offense isn't executing. And we talked about their lack of firepower. It really is about trying to take away the other team's firepower than it is trying to get your own going. And so that's what happened in that first half, is that both these teams were just really poor from the offensive end, and then Philly finally got it going in that third quarter. And that, for me, is the big issue, is if you're looking for something to diagnose about the Heat this offseason, is that they had the 20th best offense in the league, and that's not good enough, particularly when you're getting into scoring contests with teams like Philly or teams like Toronto or Washington that are getting into the 110s with relative ease. I don't know how Miami is going to figure out a way to get that offensive firepower going unless Dwyane Wade really is this game changer, which I don't believe him to be.
Yeah, that's going to be the big question, is what they can expect from Dwyane. I mean, we've almost forgotten he's on the roster at this point because he was so bad in the first month of the season. And I think you have to write that off to a certain degree, but then you also have to say, well, the 30-game sample size that Dwyane had last year at the end was not really reflective of his career either. So I don't know where he fits. Is it in between those two things? If he's in between those two things, is that good enough? And the thing we're going to address here in part 2 is Dwyane Wade's future. And, a lot of that depends on what they're expecting here from Waders, because currently they have $33 million tied up in two guards for next year, in Tyler Johnson and Dwyane Waders. And you can make an argument that the best 2 guard on their roster is Josh Richardson, and he's playing out of position. So it's a real question going forward. But before we get to Dwyane, just to sort of put a capper on it, in terms of this game and things that stood out here. I mean, again, the Heat were scrambling out to shooters. J.J. Redick was just too much for them to cover. I mean, anybody that they put on him was a problem. And it, again, shows you what Philadelphia can offer to players who want to sign 1-year deals with them going forward. Like their J.J. Redick deal, yeah, it's a ton of money. What was it, $22 million for 1 year?
Million.
$23 million for 1 year. It's a ton of money, but again, it was a minimal commitment in terms of what they have going forward, because it was just the 1-year deal. And I do believe, and we'll get into Philly a little bit later in the pod, but I believe Philly's going to be able to add any shooter they want over the next few years. It's not going to be real difficult for them to be able to do that. So they're very, very well positioned. And if J.J. Redick doesn't come back, they will find someone else who may not be as good as J.J. Redick, but he'll be a similar type player. But a couple more things just on this game in particular. We mentioned Josh Richardson at minus 17. The top plus-minus player on the team for the Heat tonight was Dwyane, actually, in 31 minutes.
Despite a 4 for 15. I mean, he got off to a good start. I think he made his first 2 shots, so that means he would have went 2 for 13 for the rest of the game. So it's not like he was scoring, but he was part of the moments that went well, particularly that fourth quarter comeback. He was on the floor. Him, Olynyk, and Justice Winslow end up with the positive plus-minuses because of that. Yep,
absolutely. But a few other players here. I mean, I thought Bam Adebayo had a couple moments tonight, but he had a rough series. Not unexpected for a rookie. But Dent raises this, though. I mean, I like Adebayo's future. But again, makes you think, I mean, if the Heat had not made that run last year, and I know that's something that you harp on, but, I mean, they were going to take Donovan Mitchell if he was available at their spot. And you just look at what Donovan Mitchell's doing right now. That makes you a little bit upset there because...
okay, but if they went 11-30 and then 11-30 again and ended up with the fourth pick or the third pick. Maybe they don't take that. I mean, if
maybe it's Jason Tatum.
Right. If they had Jason Tatum right now, I mean, you'd feel pretty fired up about the Heat's future but I mean, if you had Fultz, you wouldn't feel so good, or maybe even Lonzo Ball. I mean, maybe the whole outlook looks different depending on which rookie you take. But yeah, I think Bam for the 13th pick is much more than you could have expected. I think what he's given you this season and his future. The one thing that it does, though, and we'll get to Whiteside later on, is it just makes him further and further redundant.
Absolutely. And look, Bam had, on the whole, like you said, a promising rookie season. There's stuff to build on with him, but I think you saw some of the limitations.
And just the idea that in this game, Spoelstra, in the game for their season, trusted him with more minutes than he trusted Whiteside with. I mean, what does that say?
Well, again, that's why we're going to touch on Hassan here quickly, because clearly that says a lot, especially because the leading guy in minutes tonight was Olynyk with 37. So they actually gave, between Olynyk, Adebayo, and Whiteside, they actually gave 63 minutes total to their centers. So they paired them a little bit together tonight. Winslow, you mentioned, he was a +6 tonight, had 12 points, was 3 of 9, stepped into his shots, had a couple of really nice drives and finishes. Like that, to me, we can talk about the shooting a lot, and we have, and how he's become more confident, and he was 2 of 6 on threes tonight. But to me, the biggest step for him from a development perspective that I've seen lately is just his assertiveness on drives and the finishing around the rim. Like that seems to, over the last month, have really gotten better. And if that, to me, that's, we're going to touch on this more too, but to me, that's the biggest positive of this series is we saw a different Winslow. But again, the Sixers just have so many guys and didn't even play Fultz tonight, went 10 deep, and they're just, I mean, I think, can we pretty much sum this up before we move on to the next part, Chris? Just better, right? I mean, It's just better. And when that's the case, a team can hang with you for a half or for 3/4, but ultimately the better team in the NBA, it's not like, a fluky situation you have, in the NFL, or especially in baseball where you have a hot pitcher, or hockey where you have a hot goalie. In basketball, the better team typically wins a series, and this was the better team. All right, let's move on to part 2 here, and let's address Dwyane Wade. We've talked about the stat line a little bit tonight. Not his best. 4 of 15, 11 points, +7. 5 rebounds, 5 assists, a steal, and a turnover. He had 2 really great games in this series. One led to a victory and probably was the only reason they won. The other one was wasted in defeat when the Heat let that game get away late. I thought a little bit, sort of if this is it for Dwyane, it ends on the same court where it started. He played his first ever game as a professional in Philadelphia. I proudly say that I was there and watched him against Iverson that night, and he was shell-shocked, right? Now we look back, and we're, 15 years later, and a lot of stuff has happened in between. So I don't know if he's done for good. I would have loved for Spoelstra to get Haslam on the court with him for the last 30 seconds when this thing got away here a little bit. That didn't happen. I would expect probably that UD moves into retirement this year. I don't know if Dwyane's going to, but I will say this. It's pretty clear that Dwyane made the right decision. When Cleveland came to him and said, look, we have a deal with Miami. You're not going to play here very much the rest of the season because we're getting younger. Although I think if you now look at Cleveland's situation, that Dwyane probably would have played in the playoffs for sure. I mean, they're not even playing Rodney Hood very much anymore. Clarkson's getting spotty minutes. I think Dwyane probably would have gotten minutes over those guys, and maybe even J.R. Smith or Kyle Korver also. So he probably would have ended up getting time in Cleveland. But look, even if Cleveland makes the finals, which I don't think is going to happen now, but even if they do, they're going to get bounced, I think, pretty unceremoniously in that series against Golden State or Houston. I don't think they can hang with either of those two teams. So I think the fact that Dwyane wasn't going to win a championship in Cleveland, that he had this great moment where he gets introduced again as a member of the Heat. Then he has the moment where he scores 27 against Philadelphia, hits the game winner. He has a great playoff game, adding to his litany of great playoff games, the one that he had in Game 2. He has the impact on the community that he had after the shooting in Parkland. I think when you add all of that stuff together, there's no question that Dwyane made the right decision to come back. And I think the organization made the right decision to take him back for all of the reasons we talked about, whether it was marketing, whether it was good feeling, and whether it was honestly basketball, because Dwyane was one of the few guys in this series that they could rely on. But I got a feeling that it's over for him, Chris. I haven't talked to him about that. I've communicated with him a couple of times since he's come back, but I haven't talked to him about that. But just some of the stuff lately, the wearing the hoodie to the game tonight. I'm not for everyone, but I'm for Miami. Just some of his language lately, and also, Chris, this is the big thing. Their situation next year, as I mentioned, they have $33 million tied up in Dwyane Wade and Tyler Johnson. I don't know how they're going to move either of those two contracts. And like I said, I think their best two guard on the roster may be Josh Richardson. And even if they don't re-sign Ellington, I just don't know what the role they're going to carve out for Dwyane is if Waiters is going to go back to playing 28 to 30 minutes to justify his contract. So I think when Dwyane looks at all that, he doesn't want to play anywhere else now. I just think I would put it at about 65% that he doesn't return.
I would say the money is probably the bigger deal because the Heat won't have much money to give him. So unless he's prepared to do this all again for a pretty small amount of money, I would say probably, maybe taxpayers, mid-level, something like that. I just don't see where the money is for him to go and to go and come back and make a, maybe $10 million, something like that to go and play. So I think maybe he doesn't view it as worth it. I mean, was it 2 years ago when he was a pundit for ABC for the NBA Finals? So, I mean, we could potentially see him move into the television role. By the way, Gabrielle Union has tweeted about this tonight. She writes, quote, "I hope this isn't the end, but my God, Dwyane Wade has a career most people dream of. He is a damn legend, an icon." And, of course, you would add, and he's cute. So Gabrielle tweeting that out this evening. And, I mean...
Gabby also, Chris, Gabby also tweeted out during the game, as you pointed out to me on a text, that Gabby tweeted out that Dwyane should be playing more tonight,
it says here, it says, play Wade, it says, quote, "I'd say asking for a friend, but we all know what it is," which is, which I imagine is her screaming at her television saying, "Can you put my husband in the game?"
Right.
I mean, he did play 31 minutes, but like we talked about, I think he should have started. And you're going to want to go. And Eric Spoelstra said, "I'm going to go down with Dwyane," and so I kind of wanted to see what that looked like. But I do think that if we're kind of looking at this from a broader perspective, I do think though that Dwyane Wade comes back, and it's only because I think that maybe he takes a while. We saw Gronkowski today, right, where he announced that he was coming back to the Patriots. If you still feel like you have something to give, unless it's so physically painful that it's not even like Joe Thomas did that this offseason for the Browns, where he talked about on a podcast what it was like trying to get out of bed on Monday, that he couldn't, that he had so little left in his knees that just standing up to practice was hard, and that going through 65 snaps is. I don't think, and look, maybe there's more pain behind this than we know because, like we talked about on previous pods, he's been having knee pains for 5 years. Maybe the knee is just at a place where he just doesn't want to do what it takes in order to get that knee in the right place to go and play major NBA minutes. But I just feel like quality professional athletes don't hang it up unless they feel like they have nothing left to give. And very often they will give it up when no one wants them anymore. And that's kind of the sad way that teams go out. Now, Eric Spoelstra did say tonight at his press conference, Manny Navarro tweeted this out. Manny tweeted, "Spoelstra said he doesn't even want to think about Dwyane Wade potentially playing his last game tonight. Quote, it makes me sad. Spo said Wade could play off the bench forever." And that is kind of indicative that I think that even with the redundancy of the Heat's backcourt at the moment, he would have minutes to play on this team. So I think Dwyane Wade will come back simply because he has something left to offer. And I think it's very hard for a professional athlete to quit this before that expires.
I typically agree with you on that, and I do think that what we've seen with Dwyane is that he's aged much more gracefully than we expected. And I go back again,
which is actually kind of crazy, right? Because obviously he had the fall down 6 times, get up 7, whatever it was. But he kind of mastered old man game as a high-level athlete, and now he's just an old man with old man game, and it's the same damn. I mean, and I enjoyed Kevin McHale pointing this out, how every off guard in the league has had, that step back, that turnaround fade jumper made in his face. It's the same. We've seen the same moves that he's been using for 15 years throughout this playoff run. So he has old man game, even with his breaking down body.
He does, and I remember a conversation I had with Gary Payton once about this, where he was saying that when he first encountered Dwyane and they started playing together 2005, that he kept telling Dwyane, listen, you need to stop this because you're not going to get to your 10th year in the league. Like, you need to stop falling down. And he's like, and Dwyane never listened to me. And here we are at 15 years. And if you were to say at the beginning of their careers with the styles that they were playing, that Dwyane Wade would look better at this stage than Carmelo Anthony, I think you would be laughed at, because Carmelo's game should have aged better than Dwyane's. I mean, Carmelo never had any athleticism in his game, right? Carmelo's game was all about, just being able to get shots off, mostly from mid-range situations, and he had an ability to do that. But Dwyane's game was above the rim at the beginning of his career. It was above the rim and on the floor, okay? And for him to be at this stage where he's 36 and he's still playing at this kind of level, and some of the things that have been going around Twitter, I mean, Dwyane Wade had, until tonight, which again didn't help with the 11 points on 4-15, but prior to tonight, he had a better playoff series than Damian Lillard did, okay, in Damian's 4 games, and you're talking about an MVP candidate in his prime. So Dwyane's still playing at a high level. But again, the reason I don't think he returns, if you were to press me on it, is because, A, he's not going anywhere else again, right? He's already done that. And it didn't work for him. I mean, he didn't enjoy it. He didn't enjoy it in either place. He didn't enjoy it in his hometown, and he didn't enjoy it with his best friend. So he's not doing that again. Like, you don't think he might do the Zaza Pachulia, David West 1 year in Golden State? I don't. What's his role in Golden State, right? Like,
I mean, they're playing Quinn Cook a big playoff minutes. So
yeah,
they're playing Nick Young important minutes. So I think he could have a role to play as a bench scorer.
Maybe, but he's so different from their style. But yeah, I guess possibly. I mean, I guess they've been using Sean Livingston, right? And Sean, I mean, he's not the same kind of player as Dwyane, but he's another player who doesn't really use the 3-point line. And so I guess maybe there might be some place for him. But maybe there. I mean, maybe wherever LeBron ended up again. But does he really want to deal with the drama of that? Like, I would think. I mean, Dwyane's done that twice now, and so I mean, and. Personally, I mean, I think we're gonna do a different pod on this. We've done one already, but we should do it again. I mean, I think LeBron should go to Philly. To me, it's a no-brainer at this point that he goes there. But would Dwyane join LeBron in Philly? Probably not. So I just don't think he's going to uproot again. I mean, he's got his kids back here in Miami. His kids didn't go with him to Cleveland. Gabrielle's still working. She's got other projects, but I just don't anticipate that after he did this whole song and dance, which I think was genuine, about coming back to Miami and this being the only place that was really comfortable for him to pick up to go play, to be Patrick Ewing in Seattle or Orlando. I just, or, some of the other guys, I mean, and the other thing is, you look at his return to Miami, it was much more successful than, say, the Scottie Pippen return to Chicago or the Allen Iverson return to Philadelphia. Like, already much better than either of those. So I can't see him then after, it went as well as it did for however many games it went, and he got more moments out of it, for him going somewhere else. And so, okay, so then you say the situation here. I really don't think it's about money with him anymore. It was never really about money. It was about the respect that the money showed to him. And so,
but we're still going to go through it again, though, right?
Maybe, but look, is Mickey going to pay tax for a team? Let's say that they don't get a whale, okay, and which I don't think they're going to get. All right, I know people are talking.
How would they even do that?
Well, we're going to devote a whole pod to that, so let's not give that away. But I mean, if they look, I mean, if they're not going to get Kawhi or Lillard or somebody like that, somebody Kemba, somebody additional to build around, then you're looking at a team that again is probably middle of the road. That if they want to get rid of Tyler Johnson or Whiteside is going to have to attach an asset
Or two.
Which means you're looking at, their three most important players on the roster to me right now are Bam, Josh Richardson, and Justice Winslow, and probably you're gonna have to get rid of, like you said, one or two of those guys to just get out of cap hell here. So you're looking at that. So A, is that what Dwyane wants to play on? B, is Mickey going to pay tax for that team, which we've seen that Mickey will pay tax if he thinks the team has a real chance to win, but not if it doesn't. And so I don't know where you go there. And then, again, I'm coming back to this. They're just overloaded with small guards, right? So I don't and you have Dwyane Wade coming back, and they have to justify that contract. Or at the very least, they have to rehabilitate Wader's value enough that they can trade him. So he's going to have to play next year. Like, Dwyane Wade is going to get 28 to 30 minutes. So where are the minutes for Dwyane? Backup point guard again? You're going to go into a season again with no true backup for Dragic? Or again, what are you doing with Tyler Johnson and his $19 million? I mean, he's got it. You got to give him at least 15 to 20 minutes to justify that. So when I look at that,
15 to 20, he's got to be like 28 to 32.
Well, to justify that, right? But what did he get in this series? Right, he got basically
like 12.
12, right. So, I mean, maybe it goes up a little bit next year, and if he's healthy. But that's their situation at two guard, Chris. So I don't know. I just don't know where Dwyane – I would still rather have Dwyane on the floor than pretty much all those guys. But I don't know if they're going to view it. They've already gotten the bump out of that they wanted. I don't know that it's going to lead to a huge increase in season tickets for next year necessarily. So, I mean, I think to get an increase in season tickets, they need to get somebody from the outside who makes fans excited again, in addition to Dwyane. So, all those factors together, if you had to press me on it, I would say Dwyane does not come back.
This is CK here. Make sure to subscribe to 3 Yards per Carry and be on the lookout for this Thursday's Mega Draft preview episode. Simon and I nearly come to blows over his favorite fat guy, Quentin Nelson.
Yeah, you guys were really, really going at it.
Alf, honey, Mommy and Daddy still love you. This goes back a long way, and it all started with some Indian food that was very clearly mine. Alf and I nearly come to blows over my favorite fat guy, Vita Vea.
If you say that we're going to draft Vita Vea, then I'm calling you a on there.
And of course, none of that matters because our very well-placed sources have told us emphatically that the pick will be... Find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or Podbean, and keep an eye out for announcements from @5ReasonsSports on Twitter.
All right, let's get to part 3 here of the podcast. And speaking of a guy who may not come back, I was looking at the numbers on this, Chris, for the series. And as we're taping this podcast, Hassan Whiteside has already had something to say. I feel like Barry should write the book at this point because Barry seems to ask the question of Whiteside after every game, or at least transcribe the quote after every game about Hassan being unhappy about his minutes. And Hassan is, again, unhappy about his minutes. But let's go through some of the stats for Hassan in this particular series. 76 minutes, 26 points in the series, 30 rebounds, 1 assist, 6 blocks, 16 fouls, 12 turnovers. Played 10 minutes tonight. Embiid missed 2 games, Chris. Ended up with more than twice as many points, more rebounds, more assists, more blocks, fewer fouls, and 3 more turnovers.
So okay. if you look at it on averages, he played 15 minutes a game, averaged 5.2 points on 45% shooting, averaged 6 rebounds, a little over 1 block, and 2.5 turnovers in 15 minutes a game. Averaged a minus 5.2 in terms of plus minus. I mean, that is calamitous. That is as bad as it gets.
I was wondering if it's the worst series that any prominent Heat player has ever had. I think maybe we throw that out to the listeners here a little bit. I'd be curious if they can think of one. But I remember guys like Eddie Jones and Jamal Mashburn getting killed for series in which they scored between 13 and 15 points a game. So I'm trying to think if there's anybody. The only guy I can think of was the year 2001, which was sad because he had a really good regular season. He made the All-Star team. But Anthony Mason, totally checked out in a 3-game series against Charlotte. Totally checked out. Okay, that was actually against Mashburn's team. And he checked out because he was upset. And, may he rest in peace. And I don't want to speak ill of the dead. But, I just remember, Mason during that series. He totally checked out because Zoe came back from his kidney ailment with 13 games left in the regular season, and it totally threw the entire rotation off kilter because Riley, started giving minutes to Zoe again after it had kind of been Mason's team, and Anthony Mason gave no effort in that playoff series. That's the only series I can think of, Chris. You think of the prominent players they've had in history. I mean, people will point to LeBron's 2011 finals, right? And LeBron was historically awful for LeBron. It's the worst playoff series he's ever had, okay?
And yet he still averaged 18, 7, and 7.
Yes, right. Okay, so I'm trying, again, I would be curious for listeners' thoughts on this. I can't, just put the money aside even. Put the $98 million aside. Hassan was, an important cog, whether it was for 26 minutes this year or 33 minutes last year, in their rotation, in their starting lineup. Can you think of one? I cannot think of a guy who had a worse playoff series. People had moments like, Mashburn passing to Weatherspoon, or, Anthony Carter had some rough moments at times. There are guys that you can come up with, but never like that for somebody who is a key part of the rotation. Think of how many playoff series that Dwyane went through, and he had some ones that were clunkers for him. Again, I go back to Chicago 2011 in the Eastern Conference Finals where Bosch outplayed Wade by quite a large margin. There were some series like that. Michael Beasley had a rough series in Boston in his second season, the one where Dwyane basically begged for help afterwards because Spoelstra was benching Beasley. But I can't come up with one even 10% as bad as this one was for a core guy in their rotation.
Yeah, I'm trying to use Basketball Reference to my aid, and I can't think of I can't think of any off the top of my head. Let's see. Oddly enough, some of the ones that are coming up are from this playoff series in terms of players who had some pretty poor percentages and the like. But I just to me, when you look at the way that this series played out, Hassan Whiteside it was such a. I guess I was going to say it was a bad matchup for him, but didn't we all kind of think that because he was playing against Joel Embiid that it would kind of go better than maybe some other series where you could scheme him out? And this is to me where we talked about Eric Spoelstra and his lack of finding lineups. To me, the place where Brett Brown just out-tacticked. I don't know if that's a word, but out-tacticked Eric Spoelstra was in figuring out ways to make Hassan Whiteside more and more useless. Because not only are you putting the pressure point of making the choice of whether or not you have to play him, but then you're making life difficult for your opponent because then you have to deal with the aftermath of Hassan Whiteside being pissed that he's not playing. And you've seen it throughout the playoffs. You saw it throughout the regular season. When he doesn't play, Hassan Whiteside is a difficult character to deal with. And that is something that Eric Spoelstra had to consider, and we talked about it, right? You keep playing him so that you can keep him engaged. You wouldn't say that about Justice Winslow. Eric Spoelstra gave Justice Winslow a DNP coach's decision in the 2016 playoffs against Toronto, and it wasn't a problem. Maybe Winslow was pissed about it behind the scenes, but he didn't say right. But he didn't say anything about it in public. And
it inspired him, to be honest. Right. Conversations I had with Justice after the fact. Spoelstra gave Shane Battier. Okay, think of what Eric Spoelstra thinks of Shane Battier. Enough that Shane Battier is probably going to be running the organization in 2 or 3 years. Okay, that's my prediction where this is headed. There'll be a combination of other people. Spoelstra, Andy Ellisberg, Nick Arison clearly will be in that group. Adam Simon if he's still here. But I would not be surprised if Shane Battier is running the whole thing. He's already been promoted once, and this is kind of what they're grooming him for. And Shane Battier was given a DNP in the Eastern Conference Finals, right? It was Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals against Indiana, and Shane Battier was so upset about it that he went with his wife to a karaoke bar, okay, after that game.
Of course he did.
In Coconut Grove. He went to a karaoke bar. He went to a karaoke bar in Coconut Grove after that game, and he requested Oasis's "Don't Look Back in Anger." Okay, that's how upset Shane Battier was about that situation. And you know what, Shane?
Song, by the way,
it's a pretty good song. We should actually play it on the pod. And okay, not only did Shane Battier get over it, but he had a great game, a historically great game in that finals. Okay, so look, this is not an organization that typically feels like it needs to baby people. right? I mean, they did it with Beasley, but they're doing it now with Whiteside. And so, I guess the question becomes here. I mean, there's a quote that came in, credit this to Jason Leisure of the Palm Beach Post. Dwyane Wade calls on Hassan Whiteside not to make excuses about this series. He pleads with him to work hard this summer and come back strong for next season. Quote, hopefully he gets motivated from this series. And then Jason says, seems to be genuinely rooting for Whiteside to get it right. I respect Dwyane for saying that. You know how many times I've read that quote from Dwyane about either Whiteside or Beasley over the years?
Yeah.
It's just a broken record. It's Dwyane saying, basically, through gritted teeth, I like you, but be a professional. That's basically what he's saying. Yeah. And so, where do they go from here? I mean, you mentioned it. They went to Bam Adebayo. Kelly Olynyk for 37 minutes tonight, and Bam Adebayo for 17 minutes, where Whiteside played 10. And I was also looking at our friend Maple Rick here on Twitter, and he was going through Whiteside's stats. No deflections tonight. I think he had him down for 1 box out. Okay, so it's not just the raw numbers here, the 10 minutes and not contributing anything in the statistical stats, but not contributing anything at all. And so I don't know what they do, Chris. I mean, his value could not be any lower. I don't know. I think it's a contract, and I was rooting for him when they signed him to the long-term deal because I saw positive steps from him, improvement in free throw shooting, improvement in getting out to shooters on the perimeter, some improvement in his post game, improvement in his kind of general focus, improvement in terms of not getting into it with other players. I mean, all of that stuff looked positive, but all of that has now gone the other direction. I think it's a contract that they can move after next season because it's going to be an expiring deal. And so those are always easier to move, even in the modern NBA.
Right. I mean, we assume he'll opt into the final year of that, which is 2019-20 at $27 million.
Right. So I think there'll be some team there that would take his contract just to be able to clean out the space after the season if they want to start over. That might even be valuable to the Heat at that stage, to Pat Riley or to Nick Harrison.
Here's my thing. Here's my thing with the next. Right. Well, here to Shane Battier. Right. Here's my thing for the next 2 years. I think the Heat fans have to be okay with just eating the next 2 years. And I don't want Pat Riley to compound any mistakes that he's made by giving up first-round picks, by giving up Winslow, Richardson, or Bam Adebayo, or doing something that mortgages the future even more so that you can get off of these mistakes. I think between Tyler Johnson and Hassan Whiteside for the next 2 years, that's basically committed at somewhere between $45 and $48 million to those two players. Those are massive mistakes that are going to be hard to recover from, but the only way you make it worse is by trying to then fix the mistake in a way that just leaves you even more barren. So I think the next 2 years, to me, are just about eating your mistakes and trying to make the playoffs, trying to play in another competitive series, or in a more competitive series than you did in this go-round, but I don't think there's much you can do about it.
Well, like you said, the way to compound the mistake would be to package Justice Winslow with him just to get rid of the contract, and that's and taking a bad contract, but not as bad a contract back in return. I mean, that would be compounding the mistake. And I think after people saw the way that Justice is capable of playing during the series, then he seemed to be the one of the guys who was fighting throughout. I think a lot of Heat fans would be really angry about that move. One more quote from Whiteside before we move on. This is from Tom D'Angelo. Quote, "At least give me a chance to fight. At least give me a chance to fight. I can understand if I was playing 30 minutes and I played bad. At least give me a chance." But I understand his frustration. But again, when you look at the box and the other things that he was doing and the way they were playing with him on the floor, and they were minus 14 in 10 minutes. Plus minus could be an overrated statistic, except when it's not.
Mm-hmm. Well, except when it, like, to me, plus minus in and of itself can be misleading, right? Because the other night wasn't Winslow like a massive minus, even though
minus 27.
Okay, so you have to watch the basketball and then compare it up against and see if it matches or if it doesn't. Then you ask further questions. But anyone who was watching the game knew that Hassan Whiteside wasn't making an impact. Tonight, he didn't even affect Embiid, which was the big statistic that was thrown around in the last couple of days, particularly for Manny Navarro, was that at least Whiteside was defending Embiid individually very well. Didn't even see that tonight because Embiid finally got off. At that point, it's just like, what is he offering you? And you saw I think Mikhail was saying on that very first possession possession when James Johnson gets around the screen, drives towards the rim, and throws a pretty hard pass at Whiteside, but McHale, the big man extraordinaire, said he's got to catch that, he's got to finish that. And so it's from the very beginning. And yes, does Eric Spoelstra have a very quick hook with Whiteside? Without question, but it's earned.
Right. It's absolutely earned. And you heard, here's the other thing, Chris, and you and I talked about this off the pod, is we're aware of the Heat's frustration with Whiteside, and we're aware of it because there are certain media members who tend to parrot the Heat's perspective without getting into specifics on that. And those reporters have been killing Whiteside lately. And, again, I'm not there every day anymore, but I know how that works. And so I've talked to enough people down there to have a general idea. So they're frustrated with Hassan. That was clear before this series. And although as I've said on previous pods, they didn't go into last offseason planning to add Kelly Olynyk. Olynyk was only available because they didn't get Gordon Hayward, and Boston was clearing out salary because they were getting Gordon Hayward. And they didn't go into the draft thinking they were definitely taking Bam Adebayo because, again, if Donovan Mitchell had fallen to them, they would have taken Donovan Mitchell, and they had a couple of other names on their list there. So I don't think they went into last offseason thinking they would replace Whiteside, but I think when they got into camp this year and as the season developed and they saw what Olynyk was capable of providing, which fit Spoelstra's system better, and then they also saw that Adebayo was giving better effort than Whiteside. When you add those two things together, like you said, I just don't know where the role is, and I don't know how you create a role for him next season when more and more teams, it's not like the league is going backwards. I mean, they're not, more teams are going to be going smaller and smaller as we progress.
And more teams are going to try and take him further and further away from the rim.
Yes, absolutely. So I just don't know where you go with it.
Welcome to the Heat Beat Podcast. I'm your host, Carlo Navas. And with me today, producer and co-founder, Mr. Brian Goins.
Hi!
And Heat Twitter president, Alf. Alf, what did you think of Saturday's Game 4 between the Heat and the Sixers?
Ersan Ilyasova, that Eddie Munster-looking fuck. I cannot believe we cannot beat Ersan Ilyasova. The dude has a fucking eyebrow like a fucking mountain ridge. Like, what the fuck is going on? He has a low-sloping forehead of a career criminal, and we can't fucking stop him. Ersan Ilyasova!
Listen to Heat Beat twice a week during the NBA playoffs here on the 5 Reasons Podcast Network.
All right, let's get to the fourth part of this. This will be a little bit of a shorter section because I don't think there's quite as much to cover. But let's go over the things that went right for the Heat in this series, or at least things that were promising. I think you and I both agree. You start with Winslow, right? I mean, that would be the number one thing. And as I mentioned earlier, I think it's more so than just the shooting. It's the aggressiveness. It's the finishing. It's the competitiveness.
Well, I do want to hit on the shooting a little bit, though, because he does step into it with more confidence. You saw it tonight. Now, he stepped into it and missed it a bunch tonight. But the first one he hit, and it's not, I'm open, maybe I'll give this a go. No, I think Eric Spoelstra has probably finally drilled this into him. Look, you get it open. We need you to confidently shoot it because the Sixers are going to keep sagging off of you. You need to punish them, and you need to feel like when the ball is in the air, it's going in. And that, for me, from a shooting point of view, was a major step forward.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, no question. I mean, because the shooting, like you said, if he's not comfortable shooting the ball, it's easy to scheme him out of a game. So the fact that he's more confident, comfortable, more aggressive is a positive. I, again, go back to the driving and finishing because I think ultimately I think point guard might be his position or point forward. I think that's sort of where he was trending as the season progressed when he was kind of running the second unit in a lot of stints on the floor. Their numbers with him playing that position were good this year, so I think that'll encourage Spoelstra in the offseason to trust him a little bit more. Clearly, in terms of the pecking order of, say, primary ball handlers, he's moved ahead of Josh Richardson and Tyler Johnson, both of whom were being groomed to be point guards at one point. I think Josh made progress in a lot of other areas of his game, but I think Justice, as far as being a pace setter and running the offense from the top, I think that's something he'll get to do more often going forward. So all of that is a positive. I think if you look at some of the other positives, and the one other thing I want to mention on Justice before we move on, there are certain guys in the NBA who are just better in the playoffs. Their games are better suited for the playoffs.
And by the way, because he did also improve in the regular season after Wade joined. I think there's also certain players that feed off the energy of good players.
Yes, certainly. And I think Justice is the kind of guy. It's what I was told about him when he was drafted, that it was a much better situation for him to get drafted to Miami, where he had good vets around. And again, remember, at that time they had Chris Bosh and Dwyane Wade, and Goran Dragic, that was a better situation than, say, getting drafted by the Knicks, which is where a lot of people projected him to go, where he would be asked to kind of carry the franchise from the very beginning, like Porzingis has been asked to do, and that Justice would not be a good fit for that because he just didn't have the offensive game. But I do think certain players are better suited for the playoffs because they're versatile, and when you have matchup problems in a series, you can use them on certain players and be more effective overall. And so I think we saw that from Justice in this series. As far as the other guys, I can't really point to another guy who outpaced expectations in this series. I thought James Johnson, we got more of the good James Johnson than the bad James Johnson in this series, so I think that was positive. We're not really talking about that contract quite as much as we were before, even though that's not ideal either.
Still pretty bad.
It's still pretty bad, but at least he was a little bit more productive overall in the series. Again, Josh Richardson, hard to grade him on tonight. But as far as the whole of the series, he was good defensively, an extension of what he did in the regular season. You'd like to see him be more consistent offensively next year, particularly if Dwayne's not here. Maybe he sort of reemerges. Goran was Goran. I mean, I don't think better or worse than we would expect from him. Olynyk had a better game tonight. He had a bad game 4. I mentioned Adebayo. Wayne Ellington's another guy. He had 3 threes tonight. So he did produce 3 threes in each of his past 2 games, but I also think we saw about Wayne Ellington that they're probably okay letting him walk this offseason rather than going deep into the tax to pay him. Again, so many 2 guards on the roster, and even though you can always use shooting, I don't know that if he's going to be an $8 million player, maybe he won't be quite that much since we saw Lou Williams sign for $8 million per, but even if he's a $6 to $8 million player, I don't know if that's worth the tax price that you would pay on him. So yeah, I would say the only real positive in terms of being better than expectations would be Justice.
I would say Goran Dragic too. I mean, obviously you expect a lot from him, but having 3 straight 20-plus point games, I would say Wade also would fit into that category because I think he had one more high-quality playoff game than I would have expected. I would have expected 1. And he delivered in Game 2, and I thought, yeah, okay, that was the one. And then he turned in a really solid Game 4 performance in a losing effort, and I was like, okay, that's really cool that he was able to summon it twice. But for me, Goran Dragic, I think he has a shrinking in big moments reputation that is well-earned based off of what he's done over the course of his Miami career. And so for him to turn in 3 really good performances and a 4th pretty good one too, I would say is more than I would have expected, because I think, particularly with Dwyane Wade coming back, I think if it was his own team or it was a team sans Dwyane Wade, he takes a bit more control and you expect a bit more from him. But I just think that there is a well-earned reputation of him and Dwyane not coexisting or him shrinking next to Dwyane, and I feel like he didn't in this series. I thought he was up for it from a physicality point of view, from a skill and playmaking point of view. I think he had a good series.
Yeah, no, I thought he had a good series. And again, it was good to see him have a couple of those games. And to build on what he did against Toronto 2 years ago in the playoffs, where I thought he was much better than the series against Charlotte.
Hey, Chris, why don't you tell the people about the Balls Cast?
Don't mind if I do.
Don't mind if I do.
Hey, listen up. The Balls Cast is a podcast about Miami sports.
All kinds of Miami
Hold
things.
On.
Hold on.
Culture and politics while 2 dudes smoke weed. It's a good time. Balls Cast. So you guys should check it out.
All right, let's get to part 5 here. I know Heat fans don't want us to dwell on this very much, which is the Sixers and where they may head now as they beat the Heat 4-1 and advance to the second round. And they're going to get Boston or Milwaukee in the second round. I think they're going to be heavily favored against either team. I put out a couple of things on Twitter tonight. I guess maybe we close with this, Chris, as you kind of jump on these 2 points. The first thing I wanted to get out there was the salary situation with the Sixers going forward. You know, Joel Embiid goes up to $25 million next year. Certainly if he's healthy, he'll earn that. But then you look at their three other sort of young core players on the roster, which is Simmons, Dario Saric, who I thought was great in this series, and Markelle Fultz, who hardly played in this series, but I don't think it's time to give up on him quite yet. I mean, worst case scenario, he's an upgrade over T.J. McConnell next year, and obviously they have much higher expectations than that.
He'll play like 10 regular season games, so he's got a lot of experience and a lot of player development still to do.
Absolutely. And those three guys, Saric, Simmons, and Fultz, because of the nature of rookie contracts, make a total of $18 million next year. The Heat will be paying Tyler Johnson $19 million. Gives you a little bit of a sense of where the Sixers are positioned right now. And our friend Uptown Report, who is a big Heat fan, but also is on our 3 Yards Per Carry podcast, tweeted at me tonight that maybe I was overrating that because he was saying they're going to have a hard time replacing potentially Redick, Ilyasova, and Bellinelli if they don't re-sign those guys. And my point on that, Chris, was they're always going to find shooters. Like, it's not going to be hard. Like, maybe they won't strike it rich the way that they did this year in terms of getting Bellinelli and Ilyasova on buyouts, which cost them nothing.
Maybe they just signed Wayne Ellington. I mean, it's not that far-fetched.
I think that's a possibility. And your first thing, you always have players who want to play on emerging teams. And second thing, you're always going to have shooters who want to play with Ben Simmons, because the only guy in the league who sees the floor better than Ben Simmons, in my opinion, is LeBron James. And shooters have always wanted to play with LeBron James. And we saw that in Miami when Battier and Allen both signed up for less money than they could have taken somewhere else. And Philadelphia, while not Miami in terms of attractiveness as a city, isn't that bad either. Okay, so I just think it's going to be really easy for them to supplement this roster. I don't think they're going to have a problem at all until they start to deal with Simmons and Saric on the extensions and they have to pay them a little bit more. To me, they're just incredibly well positioned right now. And I think they have a chance, Chris, on the short term to get to the finals, because I do expect Cleveland to get past Indiana. But we've seen Kevin Love is not playing at a high level right now. LeBron has nobody else, and he's hurt, and as he always is. And LeBron has nobody else that he can count on that team from night to night. So if you're to tell me Philadelphia, as they gain experience here, if they end up in a series with Cleveland, and that would be after Cleveland likely has to get past Toronto in the second round, which I think would be a much more challenging series for them than it was last year, and then they get to Philly after Philly, in my opinion, walks all over Boston or Milwaukee. I think Philly has a legitimate chance to get to the finals this season.
Totally agree. And I think we started to kind of realize that there was a path to this once they got the 3 seed. And once you kind of see the way that the matchups broke down, the route to the conference finals was pretty clearly laid out. And now you've seen the way that this first round has played out so far. Both Cleveland and Toronto are in 2-2 series going forward, and it's very possible that both of those teams lose. Like, if you told me that John Wall and Bradley Beal won a game in Toronto, I wouldn't be shocked. If you told me that Indiana, the way that some of those games in the Cleveland series have gone, finish the job, because they feel like they belong on the same floor with Cleveland. And that, for me, is the major difference in the Eastern Conference with the last few years and this year, is that teams are not afraid whatsoever of the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they're not afraid of LeBron James. The fact that Victor Oladipo regularly goes at LeBron James, the fact that Bojan Bogdanovic feels comfortable defending LeBron James, and yeah, he doesn't always do it well or doesn't always hold LeBron in check, but feels like, yeah, I got this, I can do this. Like, there just isn't that fear factor with Cleveland. I mean, maybe Toronto has it, but because of the way that their playoff runs for the last 2 years have gone. But I think it's very possible that Philly gets an easy route to the conference finals. I thought tonight you saw a little bit of them running out of gas, but they're going to have some days off here because they took care of the series in 5, and they're probably going to take care of the next series in 5. And so they're going, even though they've never done this before, and even though they're probably not ready to go all the way to the finals, they're going to have the opportunities to rest and prepare for series. And I think Brett Brown really showed himself well in that first round against Miami. I think they're more than ready to go on a big playoff run, and it's going to be really fascinating to see if a team that's this young with superstar players that are basically between games 80 and 130 of their careers can go all the way to the finals. I think this is the first time you're going to see a team win big in the NBA, largely powered by youth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the one example that I would point to, because this doesn't happen very often in the NBA, as you mentioned, even Oklahoma City needed like a 4-year build, right?
Yeah.
That started in Seattle with Durant getting drafted and then adding Westbrook and then adding Harden and having Ibaka as part of that core before they got to the finals. The one team I would look at a little bit might be the Orlando team with Shaq and Penny that got swept by Houston in that series that Nick Anderson missed the free throws in game 1. It kind of set the tone for the whole series. I mean, that's the last kind of emerging young team that made it quite so early as this Sixers team might have a chance to make it. And I think even I think they got bounced the year. I'll have to look, but I think they got bounced the year before.
And by the way,
pretty quickly.
And by the way, Oklahoma City / Seattle, because Kevin Durant was his rookie year was the last year of the Supersonics in Seattle. He got to the finals in year 5.
Right.
So it went from 20 wins to 23 to 50 in a first-round exit to 55 and a third-round exit, a conference finals exit to Dallas, and then 47, which was the lockout-shortened season, and then lost to Miami in the finals. So it took Durant 5 years. If Embiid basically does it, obviously he missed 2 years in the equivalent of year 2, and if Ben Simmons does, or it would have been year 3 for Embiid, the equivalent of year 2 for Simmons. It's insane what these guys have done, and it's not like they're fluking their way to it. I mean, they beat Miami in 5 and were well worth their money. For that victory in the regular season, showed themselves to be a top 10 offense and a top 10 defensive efficiency team, and those are the marks of teams that get to championships. So it's not like they've figured out one way or a fluky way that they're doing this. No, they're just flatly good.
Yeah, they're flatly good. And so the other question becomes this. I threw this one out on Twitter. I'm trying to find out what people voted here in the poll. If I was to say you had a 3-year timeline here with these two teams in the Eastern Conference, which team do you think, Boston or Philadelphia, has a better chance to be the class of the East with how they're currently positioned?
I would say, man, that's a really good question. I would say Boston, and that is because you have confidence outside of their top 2. So Boston has Kyrie and Gordon Hayward, but they also have Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, who are emerging quality players, and Al Horford. But I don't even think of Al Horford. Like, they've got 5 legit guys that they're going to go forward with, and then they still have another guy to add, whether it's the Sixers pick, the Lakers pick, if it lands between 2 and 5, I think they get it, and if not, the Kings' unprotected pick next year, which is just magic. If you're the Boston Celtics, that could be a top 5 pick easily. And so Boston has 5, whereas you look at Philly, I would say right now they've got 3.25 between Embiid, Simmons, and by the way, it's not Saric, as all the commentators have said this week. It's Saric.
Saric.
I had no idea. I don't
know
when that happened.
Eric Reed gets it right. I remember Eric Reed even last season correcting himself on the air and saying it was Saric. So yes,
I've never heard of that with one of those. Is he Serbian or Croatian? I've never heard the first S turn into Saric. But yeah, so I would say those 3 guys are quality. Although actually, I think Saric is even a level below what a player like Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum is. I'm not sure he's quite that sort of third star kind of guy. And then with Fultz is totally unpredictable. So I would just say Boston has more at the moment, but maybe the high end between Embiid and Simmons is better than Gordon Hayward and Kyrie Irving. But I would say Boston right now is better placed.
Yeah, I would say Boston I would say Philadelphia for that reason. For right now, because I do think the high end with Embiid and Simmons is the highest. I mean, you could throw Kyrie in there. I'm not sure what Gordon Hayward is going to be when he comes back. I mean, I would assume he gets back to full health. I do think it was interesting that Utah was able to sub in Donovan Mitchell for him this year and finished with a higher seed or the same seed in the Western Conference. I don't know if that takes anything away from Hayward at all. I think he's a good player. I don't know if he's a Simmons or Embiid level player. I think ultimately Tatum or Jaylen Brown may end up being the second best player on that team. So you're right. In terms of depth, it's more for Boston. And you didn't even mention a guy like Rozier, who has stepped up he's a core guy now, I think, for them in Boston. And that was a pick that Danny Ainge got a lot of criticism for. That one's worked out pretty well. And I still think if they decide to keep Marcus Smart, that he's a valuable piece for them too. So, yeah, probably more depth in Boston. But to me, the best player on either team, ultimately is going to be Ben Simmons. And I would take Ben Simmons over Joel Embiid. I just think if you look at Ben Simmons' numbers and everything he delivers, and he has not even learned how to make a shot outside of 12 feet, okay? And he's still putting up these ridiculous numbers. And I went over his numbers from his first playoff series. And again, this puts into a little bit of perspective how good the guy in Cleveland is, because I was looking at Simmons' numbers in his first ever playoff series compared to LeBron's. And I know there's a little bit of apples and oranges here because LeBron's first playoff series was in his third season, but actually LeBron was the same age at that point that Simmons is now, 21 years old. And here were the numbers here, Chris, just to go through them. Simmons in this series, 5 games, 18.2 points, 10.6 rebounds, 9 assists, 50% from the floor. It's pretty damn good, right? All right, now look at LeBron. First playoff series against Washington, 6 games, 35.7 points a game, 7.5 rebounds, 5.7 assists, 51% from the floor. I think Simmons, we've always talked about how LeBron was more Magic than Michael. I think Simmons is more Magic than LeBron is. But I think he has a chance to be, as LeBron finally starts to descend, and I don't know when that's going to happen, I think Simmons has a chance to be the best player in the league, potentially, because you already can see what he can do defensively, which so he can change a game both ways, and it'll be very interesting, and maybe we close here, it'll be very interesting what LeBron thinks of that situation in Philadelphia this summer, because we talk about Philadelphia's future. A lot could change if LeBron James decides he wants to play there. And I know there are people who would question whether he can play with Simmons. I think LeBron can play with anybody in terms of that. And if LeBron and Wade learn to play together, and I know obviously Dwyane is better as an off-ball player than Simmons is at this stage, but if LeBron and Dwyane were able to find spots on the floor and make that work ultimately, I think LeBron could figure out a way to make it work with Simmons and with Embiid and with the cast of characters that they have there, and I think they'd be able to add another shooter. So that's the one wild card. I don't think LeBron's going to Boston. I think there's a chance he goes to Philadelphia, and that changes the whole equation. All right, let's wrap there, Chris. We've gone long today, but we wanted to wrap up everything that had to do with the Heat playoff series. We're going to weigh in again, likely on the Heat later this week. Before we start to get into some NFL draft coverage, if you want great NFL draft coverage, though, certainly check out the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast. And like I said, they're going to be taking over the 5 Reasons Sports account all day on Thursday. So go there. They're going to answer all of your questions. There's nobody who knows more about the draft in this market than Simon Clancy and Chris Kaufman. So CK Parrott, Cy Clancy, going to take your questions there. Also, download the Live Vote app if you can. You can get it on Google Play or on iTunes if you're on Apple. And that's a good thing to do because we're going to be running contests off that soon. So download that app, click on the 5 Reasons channel, start to play around with that a little bit. We'll be posting the podcast there and also posting some votes. And like I said, eventually we'll be posting some contests. Thanks for joining us today. We'll talk to you soon.